these men are going to love her anyway. So she talks about how bad she is to these guys. She admits to it. Keep in mind that she's talking here to her audiences, a group of men. And we find out later on that one of the men is thinking about marrying soon. And he's, hearing the wife of Bath, he gets really freaked out. He's like, why would I want to marry when this is what I'm marrying into? And she says, wait, just hear me out. And continues with her prologue. We'll talk about that later when she gets to her second two husbands. But the first three husbands that she describes as good husbands, she seems to have the least love. I mean, she doesn't really love them all that much. She does use them for sex, but she mainly uses them for purse, for the money that they offer. When we get to the last two husbands, husband number 4 and husband number 5, we see her role switch a little bit. She very easily paints herself as the victimizer with her first 3 husbands. This changes to where she's more the victim in the second two or the last 2 husbands. We see a role change, and I think this has a lot to do with her age. When we look at the story as far as the tale that she tells, we've got to pay attention to the age. The wife of Bath is looking back at her youth. I would argue that one of the main things we see from the wife of Bath is the message. It's kind of cliche now that youth is wasted on the young. She's looking back at her youth, and I don't think she's necessarily looking back with pride always. I mean, there are things she's proud of. I think it's a mixture of pride and also a mixture of wisdom. Wisdom gained through being burned, which we'll talk about some of the ways she gained that wisdom. Line 210 is when she talks about the philosophy of not valuing something that's gifted. And this is true. I mean, if someone gives you something and you don't earn it for yourself, we don't appreciate it as much. I'm guilty of this. I'm sure one of the things I most remember about childhood as far as toys, toys that I'd saved up and bought myself, oh, I took care of those, but toys that I got for Christmas or stuff like that, I'd feel free to experiment with those, tear those up and see, what's inside this, because I didn't really appreciate it. It was freely given. I didn't have to work for it. She hits that philosophy pretty directly in her description as far as love freely given isn't necessarily returned. She says that love that's withheld, when you make it seem like it's not allowed or something like that, that it's more appealing. And I don't want to get too stereotypical with that, because that could go very, very stereotypical. But I think that it's grounded in truth, depending on the person, that sometimes the mystique, once the mystique and once the dance, the back and forth is gone, and you win, you don't necessarily want the prize anymore. She definitely would be an individual that follows that mold. There's a very interesting philosophy where she basically gives advice to the young maids to defend themselves against the suspicion of their husbands. And her defense is basically just reversing suspicion. She argues, if your husband comes at you suspecting you being unfaithful, you just reverse it on him and talk about how, with a maid that's on your side, go to him talking about how the maid has told on him that he's approached her sexually, or as she calls him, like lecher, and I mean, just basically to get the suspicion off of you, you fling it back, attack. Your defense is to attack harder than his attack. The funny thing of this is she actually, in her attack that she goes through, as far as the advice she gives, she mentions a lot of the anti-feminist philosophy, or anti-feminist ideas at the time. The double standard that would be very hard, that she basically makes it clear that women during this time period were damned if they did, damned if they didn't. It was this image of if they cleaned themselves up and took care of themselves, and of course they were promiscuous. If they didn't do that, then they were recluses, or just they just couldn't win. And she really does strike on this mentality of, I can't win. But the interesting thing is she admits that she's used this tactic in her past. The first 3 husbands, she would use this tactic. And she admits that this was to cover guilt, that she was guilty of everything she was accusing her husbands of. But her way of dealing with that suspicion was to just accuse the husband first before they accuse you. And she would have them apologizing for things she knew they didn't even do, that she had done. But she was able to twist it to where they felt the need to apologize for it. So that's one of those things where I wonder if it's more detrimental to the image of women than constructive. But she does have power over her husbands. There's a neat little comparison with the cat that, as far as it's a line 355. She talks about how men compare women to cats, as far as if you singe the cat's coat, then the cat will stay in the house and not want to go out. But if a cat's coat is well groomed and sleek, then the cat will never be in the house. It wants to be out and be seen. And she says, you think women are the same way. This goes back to the anti-feminist sentiment of it was very common to have these ideas that compared women with beasts. And we know today that that's not really a good thing. That's not a good metaphor habit to make. To compare women to beasts is to make them less human. And that's not good. Again, just to touch on the irony involved in this list of all the anti-feminist ideas, is that she's guilty of reinforcing these ideas on some level. I mean, a lot of these anti-feminist ideas were based on promiscuity, were based on just the, I guess, not sinful, lustful nature of women, that they're manipulative, that they lie, and she does all these things, and she does them very well. She does them very effectively. She wins. Every husband, even the 5th one, which she has the most trouble with, and we'll talk about, she ultimately does win. I wonder the effect that the Wife of Bath's character had for Chaucer's direct audience. It has an interesting enough effect for our audience. I think this would have been, I don't know if it would have been controversial or if it would have been just seen as reinforcing ideas that were already held. I think it does kind of both. There's just kind of a funny part that I wanted to point out that we still hear today in our society. She admits as far as alcohol, she defends her right to drink, and she also tries to explain the benefit of allowing women to drink is that it loosens them up. This is about line 470. She says, after wine she thinks of Venus. Let's get to the last 2 husbands she has. These are, I guess, would be the bad husbands, but also the husbands, especially husband number 5, is the one that she loves best, as far as the love that she puts in seems to be the most. The 4th husband had a woman on the side, had a paramour. It's important to remember that this is going to be later on in her life. She's gotten older with husband number 4, and she says that she gives husband number 4 as much sex as he wants, but it's not enough. He still has someone else that he looks for. And you have to look at the psychology of that effect on her, that she's had all the power in her first 3 relationships, where she's had all the control, it seems, and all of a sudden in this relationship she's not enough. Her 4th husband has to have more. Now, it's interesting, her 4th husband has a paramour, and she also meets her 5th husband while her 4th husband is still alive.